Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Aunt Betty's Stories. Here we share real-life tales of family, love, and hope. Sit back, relax, and let your heart feel every emotion. Stories told with warmth, honesty, and gentle reflection. I still remember the sound of that evening more than the words. It was a soft sound, almost nothing. Just the quiet click of a teacup touching the table. But in that moment it felt like the whole world had shifted, for him, for me, and for the life we had built together. People think heartbreak arrives with shouting, storms, or broken plates. Mine arrived with silence. A silence so gentle, so steady, that I didn't even realize it had cracked my heart until I felt the coldness spreading inside. It happened on a day that looked like every other day. A simple afternoon. The curtains were half open, the light was warm, and my husband was sitting at the dining table scrolling on his phone. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. But then his phone buzzed again and again, short, sharp vibrations that made his jaw tighten. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just kept reading whatever his mother was sending. I asked softly, "Is everything okay?" He didn't even raise his eyes. And then, he said the sentence that changed everything. "My mother said you disrespected her. Why would you do that?" My hands froze. My breath stopped. I tried to remember what I had done, what mistake, what word, what gesture, but nothing came. I had simply not paid a small bill she asked me to handle. That was all. Tiny thing. A forgetful moment in a long, tired day. I opened my mouth to explain. But before I could speak, he added something else. Something that felt like a door closing quietly inside my chest. "How dare you go against my mom?" There it was. A declaration. A verdict. A choice. Not loud, not angry, just firm and final. I felt something slipping away, something that had held me together for years. It wasn't the marriage itself, it was the feeling that I mattered to him, that my voice mattered, that my side of the story mattered. I sat down slowly, almost afraid that the chair beneath me might break like my heart had. I wanted to tell him I was tired. I wanted to tell him I had simply forgotten. I wanted to tell him I never meant any harm. But I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence is the only thing you have when the person you love stops listening. That was the moment, soft, simple, and painfully calm, when I realized my husband had chosen someone else's voice over mine. I didn't cry. Not yet. Tears come later, when the truth finally settles inside you. People often think a marriage breaks suddenly. But the truth is softer, quieter. It breaks the way old walls do, one tiny crack at a time. So slowly you don't notice anything until sunlight begins leaking through places it never should. Before that moment, before the sentence that changed everything, my life looked ordinary from the outside. A small home, a simple routine, and a husband I believed I understood. I wasn't a perfect wife, but I had always tried to keep peace, especially with his family. His mother was a difficult woman, sharp with her words, quick to judge, slow to forgive. But she was his mother. And I had always believed love meant adjusting, compromising, staying silent more than speaking. When I married him, I told myself I could handle her. Every woman has to deal with a mother-in-law. It was nothing new. But I didn't know then how much her voice mattered to him. How every complaint she made would come to him like an emergency. How every small mistake of mine, when passed through her mouth, would sound like a crime. Still, our early days were peaceful. He used to smile more. He used to notice me. He used to sit next to me during dinner, not across from me with his phone between us like a wall. I remember the mornings the most. We had a habit. He would wake up first, walk to the kitchen, and start the kettle. As the water heated, he would knock lightly on the bedroom door and say, "Your tea is coming." It was a small sentence, almost silly, but it made me feel loved, seen, cared for. Back then we talked. Not deep conversations. Just little things. My day, his work stories, the new cafe down the street, a neighbor's wedding. Our home felt warm even if it wasn't big. But slowly, so slowly I cannot even place the exact day, it began to change. Started with his phone. At first, he would step away for a moment if his mother called. Then he would leave the room for longer. Then he started whispering. And then one day, he simply stopped talking to me after answering her calls. I used to joke gently, "Your mother must have a lot of stories for you." He would smile, but the smile never reached his eyes. "They're not stories," he said once. "Just important things." Important. That word stayed with me. Suddenly everything she said was important, and everything I said became optional. The shift didn't happen with a fight. It didn't happen with shouting. It happened in the everyday moments. The first time he ignored my suggestion. The first time he corrected me in front of her. The first time he chose to spend the evening with her instead of coming home. I kept telling myself, it's temporary. Families have phases. But phases end. This didn't. I noticed something else too. Whenever his mother visited, she sat in our living room as if it belonged only to her. She rearranged cushions, opened cabinets, examined my cooking pots, and asked questions that were not really questions. You still cook this way? You don't know how to fold clothes properly? You didn't clean the windows? I would smile politely. I wasn't raised to snap back. I believed respecting elders meant staying quiet, even when words hurt. My husband never defended me. Not once. He would stand near her, arms folded, listening as if every comment she made was wisdom. He never said, "Mom, that's enough." He never said, "She tries." He never said, "Don't talk to my wife like that." And each time he stayed silent, something inside me bent a little. Not broke, just bent. Like a branch holding too much snow. But even then I kept forgiving. Sometimes forgiveness is not a choice. It becomes a habit. I remember one specific day when the first real crack appeared. It was a Sunday morning. Warm sunlight covered the kitchen tiles. I was making breakfast, simple eggs, toast, and tea. He walked in, not with the usual soft smile, but with a stern look I couldn't understand. "My mother says you forgot to bring back her dry cleaning," he said. I blinked. "I thought you said you would bring it yesterday. You had the car. She asked you. Why didn't you do it? It was raining and I was tired. I thought." He raised his hand slightly. Not to hit, but to stop my sentence. That's not an excuse. My heart tightened. It was one small thing. One ordinary misunderstanding. But the way he spoke that sentence, it felt rehearsed, borrowed, repeated from someone else's mouth. Later I realized it was from hers. That day was the beginning. But back then I convinced myself it was just stress. I told myself he didn't mean it. People say strange things under pressure. I wiped my tears quietly while washing dishes, telling myself, he will soften. He always does. But soft days became fewer. Sharp days became normal. Still I stayed. Still I tried. Still, I believed our marriage was stronger than outside influence. I didn't know. The moment was coming when he would make the choice clear. Not with anger. Not with shouting. But with calm certainty. The moment where I would realize I was no longer his priority. No longer his partner. Just someone living at the edge of his mother's shadow. As the months passed, the distance between us didn't arrive with sudden storms. Came quietly like fog. One day the sky is clear, the next day everything looks blurred. And you don't even know when the fog began to creep in. There were evenings when I would stand at the kitchen counter cutting vegetables, listening to the small sounds of our home. The clock ticking, the fridge humming, the soft thump of clothes inside the washing machine. Ordinary sounds. Comforting sounds. But all I wanted to hear was his voice. And he wasn't speaking much anymore. He spent more time on his phone, scrolling through messages I never saw, laughing at things I wasn't part of, becoming someone I no longer recognized. Or maybe someone I never really knew. Sometimes I wanted to ask, do you still see me? Do you still feel like I'm your partner, your friend, your home? But I never found the courage. Love makes you brave in some ways, and painfully quiet in others. One night I tried to talk to him. He was lying on the sofa, one hand resting behind his head, the other holding his phone. His mother had called earlier, and he was still thinking about whatever she had told him. I sat beside him gently. "Can we talk for a moment?" I asked. He didn't look up. "About what?" "About us." His fingers paused for a second, then continued tapping on the screen. "What about us?" I swallowed. "I feel like there's something wrong. You're distant. You get upset with me so easily. And I feel like I'm losing you." He exhaled sharply, not in pain but in irritation. "You're overthinking again," he said. "My mom just wants what's best for me. And for us." I nodded slowly. I know she cares. But sometimes the way she says things, it hurts me. That was the first time he looked up. And his eyes weren't soft. They're not meant to hurt you, he said. She's just honest. You take things too personally. I felt something inside me shrink. I whispered, I'm only telling you how I feel. He shrugged. I don't know why you're making big issues out of nothing. It wasn't the dismissal that hurt me. It was the pattern. Every time something came from his mother, every comment, every complaint, every tiny misunderstanding, he took it as truth. And every time I tried to express my feelings, he saw it as a burden. I went to bed early that night. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what else to do. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to him in the living room. Cups clinking, slippers moving across the floor, phone beeping. All ordinary sounds. But they made me feel more alone than silence ever could. The next morning brought a different kind of ache. His mother sent a voice message while he was having breakfast. He listened to it through headphones, yet somehow I could feel the energy change the moment it ended. He stood up abruptly. I'm going out, he said. I asked softly, is everything okay? No, he replied. Mom is upset. My heart dropped. Because of me? He didn't answer. He just picked up his keys and left. And I stood by the kitchen counter, feeling the house fall strangely quiet without him, like a room after the lights go out, where you finally realize how dark it truly is. That evening, he returned with a coldness I had never seen before. We need to talk, he said. My hands trembled slightly. Okay. I'm listening. He sat down, clasped his hands, and stared at the floor before speaking. My mother thinks you don't respect her. The words felt heavy like stones placed on my chest. I whispered, why would she think that? I've always tried to be polite. He shook his head slowly, as if explaining something obvious. She says you don't listen to her. You forget things she asks. You don't support her. My voice cracked. I'm trying my best. Sometimes I get tired. Sometimes I forget small things. That doesn't mean. He didn't let me finish. Please, he said firmly, just don't make excuses. For a moment, I felt my heart go quiet. Not from fear, but from understanding. Something inside him had shifted. His mother's words had grown louder than mine. So loud that mine barely reached him anymore. Still I stayed calm. What do you want me to do? I asked softly. He shrugged again, that same tired gesture I had begun to hate. Just try harder. I nodded. I always nodded. I always agreed. I always bent myself into shapes he didn't even notice. But bending too long leads to breaking. And though I didn't know it then, the break was coming soon. Days passed quietly, almost painfully. I began noticing small things I had ignored before. Little gestures that used to make me smile now made me flinch. The way he would answer the phone too quickly when his mother called, the way he would laugh softly at messages I couldn't see, the way he would sit in silence when I tried to talk. Our home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage where I was performing a role he barely noticed. I cooked, cleaned, smiled politely. I nodded, agreed, and said the right words. But every time I looked at him, I realized he was somewhere else, always listening to someone else's voice. It wasn't easy to admit it, even to myself. I had built this life believing love was enough, believing that patience, kindness, and quiet understanding could overcome anything. But slowly the realization crept in. Love alone doesn't change what someone prioritizes. Even if that someone is your husband. One evening I tried to share a memory. We used to laugh so much in the kitchen, I said softly. Do you remember how silly we felt, dancing while the kettle boiled? He smiled faintly, but then he checked his phone. I remember, he said, but I'm busy now. The words were simple, almost harmless, but inside they cut deeply. Because I knew busy meant listening to someone else's priorities, someone else's expectations, someone else's judgment. That night, I lay awake thinking about my marriage, thinking about how love can coexist with neglect, thinking about how patience can sometimes feel like silence in a room where you should belong. I remembered the first time he held my hand, the first time he whispered, "I'll always be here," the first time he looked at me and smiled like I was the only person in the world. Somewhere along the way, that man had vanished, replaced by someone who obeyed another voice first. Someone who measured my worth not by love, not by effort, but by how well I followed rules I had never agreed to. And yet I stayed. I told myself patience would bring him back. I told myself this was a phase. I told myself the man I loved was still there, just hidden beneath all the other noise. But a heart can only bend so far. And mine was beginning to ache in places I had forgotten existed. Then came the small arguments. First they were like tiny sparks. A misplaced word, a forgotten task, a misunderstood gesture. But each one grew, fueled by silence and unspoken expectations. By the time we argued, it wasn't about the original thing anymore. It was about the pattern, the accumulation, the invisible wall rising between us. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at his mother during her visits, seeing how she smiled at him, how she critiqued me, and how he simply listened. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to make him see, but the words never came out. I had learned too well that speaking only pushed me further away. I began spending more time in quiet corners of our house, sitting by the window with tea, listening to the soft hum of life outside, reading, thinking, reflecting. It was peaceful in its way, but it was also lonely, because the person I had expected to be my partner was no longer beside me in that quiet. And that, I realize now, was the perfect storm waiting to happen. Because when the moment finally came, the moment he would choose, I had no more energy to bend, no more strength to negotiate, no more patience to forgive. The cracks had formed over months, invisible to everyone else, invisible even to him, I think, but very visible to me. And I had been living with them quietly, faithfully, hoping, praying that love would be enough. It wasn't. That is when I began sensing the exact day when my world would tilt, when his choice would become crystal clear, and when I would finally understand the truth that had been building around us quietly, like fog creeping into a home that used to feel warm. I didn't know it yet, but the moment was coming, and my life, our marriage, would never feel the same again. The days after that evening became a delicate dance. Every movement, every word, every glance was measured. I learned to speak softly, to bend slightly, to smile just enough so that no one would notice the tension. Yet, beneath that quiet surface, everything was shifting. He had started keeping his distance, not dramatically, not with anger, but with a calm, subtle detachment that spoke louder than any fight ever could. Our conversations grew shorter. Our meals were eaten in silence. I would try to laugh at a story, but he would nod politely without really hearing it. It was as if a wall had risen between us, built brick by brick with his mother's expectations and my quiet compliance. One afternoon, I decided to confront the small tension. "I feel like we're drifting," I said gently, sitting across from him at the table. He glanced up briefly, his eyes tired. "Drifting? We're fine," he replied. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it that I couldn't understand. "Fine," I repeated softly. "But sometimes you listen to her first, and me second. I feel invisible." He frowned slightly, looking away. "It's not about choosing," he said slowly. "She's my mother. You know that. Everything I do, it's for family. You understand, right?" I nodded quietly, but the nod didn't feel like agreement. Felt like surrender. I had surrendered so many times before, and each surrender had quietly chipped away at the bond one thought unbreakable. I began noticing how little things had started to irritate me, things that once felt small and insignificant. The way he always agreed with his mother even when I had a valid point. The way he would leave the room whenever she called. The way he never stood up for me. I remember one evening clearly. We were hosting his mother for tea, as we often did. She sat on the sofa, her posture perfect, her smile just sharp enough to make me nervous. "I'm glad you tried this recipe," she said, sipping her tea slowly. "But I think it needs a little more salt." I smiled politely, trying not to let her words sting. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'll adjust it next time." My husband, sitting beside her, nodded. "Mom's right," he said. He didn't smile at me. He didn't meet my eyes. He only repeated her words. I felt the first real pang of resentment, not towards her but towards him. Because every time she criticized me, he echoed it without thought or defense. And I began to wonder if he saw me as his partner, or just someone living under her judgment. Later that night, I reflected on these moments quietly. I knew I should speak up. I knew I should say, "Please, not every word of hers matters more than my feelings." But I didn't, because speaking up had never changed anything. It only widened the gap, revealing how differently we saw our lives together. Then came the small misunderstandings, the ones that seem trivial at first but pile up like snow until they become avalanches. One morning I asked him to help with a small task around the house. Nothing major, just folding laundry together. "I can do it later," he said, not harshly, but with a firmness that stopped me. Later, I found out he had spent an hour with his mother on the phone, discussing plans I wasn't invited to, decisions I wasn't aware of. It was just small moments like this, but they added together, forming a silent wall between us. I started documenting these moments in my mind, quietly keeping score of hurt feelings, of silences, of unspoken words. Because as much as I loved him, I was beginning to notice a pattern. And patterns rarely lie. He began leaving for work earlier, returning later. Every day I found more space between us, not measured in feet, but in attention, care, and shared life. I tried to reach him with notes, small gestures, tea left on his desk. But nothing changed. And then came the day he spoke to me differently in front of others. We were invited to a neighbor's small gathering. I had spent hours preparing. Our house cleaned, food arranged, table set beautifully. He arrived, greeted everyone warmly, but when my efforts were noticed and complimented, he said nothing. Instead, he spoke to his mother in private, smiling and laughing, sharing stories that should have been ours together. I felt invisible. Not because he ignored me deliberately, but because he had chosen another voice over mine. A voice I had believed he would protect me from. A voice I had trusted him to balance with my own. Later that night I asked him quietly, "Do I still matter to you?" He hesitated, then said, "Of course you do. But sometimes she needs me more. Her. Always her. Not the life we built together. Not the home we shared. Not the person who loved him quietly and deeply." And in that moment I realized these small cracks had become more than cracks. They had become a silent chasm. And each day, each choice, each word from her pushed me further to the edge. The tension began to grow like a slow storm on the horizon. At first it was almost invisible. A missed smile, a short word, a glance at his phone while I spoke. I told myself these were small things. But small things over time weigh heavier than any storm. There were mornings when I would wake up before him. The sunlight would creep softly into our bedroom, and I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, thinking about our life, about the man I had married, about the love I still held in my heart. I would wonder if he felt the same, or if I was now just a quiet presence he tolerated. I tried subtle ways to reconnect. A gentle touch on his arm while he read the newspaper. A warm smile while preparing his breakfast. Question about his day. Nothing dramatic, just simple acts of care. Most times he barely noticed. And when he did, it was polite, almost mechanical. No warmth, no intimacy, no sense of us. Our conversations became logistical rather than emotional. Discussing bills, appointments, errands. Not feelings, not dreams, not shared memories. It was as if the foundation of our marriage had shifted from love to obligation. I remember one evening in particular. He was standing in the kitchen, helping with the dishes when his phone buzzed. A message from his mother. He glanced at it quickly, his brow furrowed slightly. Then he sighed. "What is it?" I asked gently. "Mom says I should make sure the repairs are done today," he replied. Not a question. Not an invitation. A statement. I nodded, not wanting to make him feel defensive. But inside my heart ached. Everything he did seemed filtered through her voice, her expectations, her judgment. I felt like a shadow in my own home. Weeks later, a small argument erupted, something trivial. I had forgotten to buy an ingredient she had requested. It wasn't deliberate. But it became a test, a measure of my respect, my worth, my place in their family. He raised his voice slightly, though not angrily. "Why didn't you bring it?" I explained quietly. It slipped my mind. "I was busy with." "Busy?" he interrupted. "Your mother asked. How can you be busy when she asks for something so simple?" I felt my cheeks flush. I wanted to say, "I'm human. I make mistakes." But the words caught in my throat. I had learned long ago that arguing only pushed him further into her influence. I stayed quiet, and in that silence I realized how much space she had taken in his life, and how little room remained for me. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he looked at me after speaking, like a teacher correcting a student, not a husband supporting his wife. Not a partner standing beside the person who had chosen to love him wholeheartedly. Then came the nights when he would leave the house to see her, saying, "Just a quick visit," or, "I need to help her with something." Hours would pass. I stayed home, waiting, hoping, thinking maybe I had misunderstood. But deep inside I already knew. I was second. Always second. I tried to talk to him once gently, carefully. "I feel like your mother comes first," I whispered one night. He looked at me with calm eyes. "You know she's important," he said softly. "Don't make this a bigger issue than it is." I nodded. I wanted to shout. I wanted to cry. But instead I stayed silent, realizing that shouting would only confirm what I feared. That I was powerless in this dynamic. The small signs of betrayal were everywhere. The way he would check with her before making any decision at home. The way he sought her approval for even minor choices. The way I was slowly erased from his priorities, not with anger, but with gentle obedience to someone else. And still I tried. I cooked his favorite meals. I smiled. I cleaned. I laughed softly at his jokes. I reminded myself of the early days, of the man who held my hand and promised me the world. But the man in front of me now, he had chosen a different world. One where I existed quietly in the background, always bending, always waiting, always polite, always unnoticed. It hurt silently but deeply. A pain that didn't shout, didn't cry. It lingered like a shadow in every corner of our home. Then came the day that set everything in motion. It was a rainy afternoon. The sky was gray, the streets glistening with water, and the house smelled of wet earth and tea. I had prepared a small lunch, hoping to share a quiet meal together. He came home, glanced at the food, and said softly, "Mom called. I need to see her." I froze. "Now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Yes. She needs help," he said without hesitation, without looking at me. And in that instant I realized it fully. He had chosen her. Not in anger. Not in argument. But in calm, deliberate, everyday choices. Choosing her meant choosing her voice, her expectations, her judgment. Over me. Over the life we had built together. I stayed silent that day, making my tea alone by the window. The rain tapping softly against the glass. A quiet soundtrack to the ache inside me. I didn't cry yet. Not then. I simply waited, hoping but already knowing that the real moment of truth was approaching. The days that followed became a careful balance of appearances and hidden hurt. I smiled when visitors came, laughed at stories I didn't find funny, complimented meals I barely tasted, all while my heart quietly shrank. The life we had imagined together felt like a fading photograph, its colors softening with each passing day. I noticed how he leaned toward his mother in small moments. A shared laugh, a soft glance, a whispered comment. And each time I felt invisible. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, calm, like the gentle erosion of a stone in a river. The kind that wears away a foundation without anyone realizing until the wall falls. I tried one last time to bridge the distance. "I miss us," I whispered one evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at his phone. After a long pause, he said softly, "We are fine. Really. You worry too much." I nodded quietly, because arguing had never helped. Not shouting. Not pleading. Not even crying. I remembered the early days, the laughter in our kitchen, the warmth of his hand in mine, the whispered promises under dim lights. I clung to those memories. They were all I had left. And yet, clinging hurt too. Because the man I loved, the one who had held me as if nothing could break us, was quietly slipping away. Then came the subtle tests. Little things that revealed where his heart truly lay. His mother would call, asking him to run errands, make decisions, intervene in small matters. And he obeyed. Always. Always with calm certainty. Always without hesitation. Always choosing her over me. One rainy afternoon I tried to speak. "I feel like you're living for her and not for us," I said softly, barely louder than the rain tapping against the window. He glanced at me, expression calm, almost detached. "That's not fair," he replied. "She's my mother. Of course I have responsibilities to her." I wanted to shout. I wanted to cry. But I didn't. Instead, I simply nodded, sitting quietly, letting the quiet ache fill me. Because shouting wouldn't make him see me. It would only confirm his certainty that I was weak, over-emotional, secondary. I began spending more time alone, walking in the garden, sitting by the window, reading books that didn't distract me, thinking about choices that had been made quietly every day, over months, over years. It wasn't the absence of him that hurt the most. It was the absence of us, the companionship, the mutual care, the shared life that had once defined our marriage. And then came the small but piercing moments of betrayal. A forgotten promise here, an unacknowledged effort there, a quiet decision that excluded me from our shared plans. Each one left a mark, invisible to the world but painfully clear to me. A map of neglect slowly forming in the corners of my heart. I realized that this wasn't about one mistake. It wasn't about an argument, a misunderstanding, or a disagreement. It was about patterns. Patterns of loyalty, attention, choice, and priority. And in those patterns, his mother had always come first. Not me. Not our life together. Not the home we had built from scratch with love and patience. One evening, he returned from visiting her. I tried to share a small piece of my day. "Look at this letter I received," I said, hoping to connect, to show him a fragment of my world. He glanced at it quickly, then put it aside. "I need to call my mother," he said. It was said without anger, without malice. Just a simple, calm, deliberate choice. And with that, I understood completely. He had already chosen. Not in a fit of emotion, not in a heated argument, but in quiet, everyday decisions. The ones that matter most in the long run. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply felt the weight settle in my chest, a gentle, unstoppable ache. A realization that the person I had loved, trusted, and believed in had already made his choice. And that choice did not include me. That night I sat by the window watching the rain fall softly, and thought about all the quiet moments that had led here. The unspoken words, the small resignations, the subtle betrayals. Everything had added up. Everything had led to this calm, undeniable truth. And yet even in that ache I found clarity. I understood something vital. Love alone cannot keep someone by your side if their heart is elsewhere. Compassion alone cannot bridge a gap built by choices, priorities, and loyalties. And patience alone cannot force a partner to see what is in front of their eyes. I lay awake that night thinking about what I had done, what I had tolerated, and what I had hoped for. And I realized that the conflict wasn't just external, it was internal. Within me, between my hope and my reality, my love and my truth, my patience and my dignity. The rising tension had reached its peak, and I knew, deep in my heart, that the next moment, the turning point, would reveal everything. Every unspoken word, every neglected effort, every quiet heartbreak. The storm had been building slowly, patiently, silently. And the day of reckoning was coming. The day it all became clear started quietly, without warning. A morning like any other, soft sunlight spilling through the curtains, birds chirping outside, the faint aroma of tea and bread in the kitchen. I was in the living room folding clothes, humming a small tune to myself, when I noticed him pacing near the window. He seemed tense, restless, almost lost in thought. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but a familiar hesitation held me back. The hesitations that had grown over months, years even. The feeling that asking could open a door I wasn't ready to walk through. And yet I did. "Are you all right?" I asked softly, placing the folded laundry aside. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the door, then back at me, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said quietly, "We need to talk." I felt my heart constrict. Not in panic, not in fear, but in recognition. The moment had arrived, the moment I had been sensing for months, the moment I had both dreaded and awaited. He motioned for me to sit. I did, carefully, as if one wrong move could shatter the fragile calm that had existed in our home for years. He took a deep breath. "I don't know how to say this," he started, his voice low, controlled, deliberate. I think my mother has been right about some things. About us, about you." I tried to process the words slowly, each syllable landing like small stones on my chest. "Right about what?" I asked softly. He paused, looking at the floor, running a hand through his hair. "You don't always do what she expects. You forget small things, don't follow through." I realize now I should have seen it from both sides. But I didn't. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. This wasn't the turning point yet. This was still prelude, calm before the storm. And the calm made it even harder to breathe. I've made choices, he continued, still avoiding my eyes. Choices about who to listen to, who to trust. And I see now that maybe I've hurt you. I felt my hands tremble slightly. Maybe, I whispered. You hurt me every day. Not maybe. He flinched at my words but remained composed. Yes, he admitted. I chose her sometimes over you. I thought it was right. But I realize now how wrong it was. I don't know what to do. I looked at him, seeing the conflict written across his face. The man I had married, the one who had once promised to protect me, to stand beside me, was now a man caught between his love for me and his loyalty to his mother. And in that moment I understood the depth of the chasm. The turning point had arrived, not in anger, not in yelling, not in dramatic confrontation, but in quiet truth. For hours we talked. Not shouting, not crying, just talking. About months of silence, small betrayals, overlooked feelings, quiet heartbreaks. I spoke about the loneliness I had felt while he chose her voice over mine. I spoke about the way small things became tests of my worth. And he listened, really listened, for the first time in months. There was no instant solution. No magical forgiveness. No sudden reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. And acknowledgement can be both painful and liberating. Later that evening, his mother called. I watched him pick up the phone, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. He spoke to her politely, gently, but there was a subtle firmness in his tone that hadn't been there before. For the first time I realized he was beginning to balance the voices. Not yet fully, not yet perfectly, but beginning. I spent that night reflecting on everything, the months of quiet hurt, the gradual erosion of intimacy, the small cracks that had become chasms. I realized that the turning point wasn't just his moment of realization. It was mine too. The moment I understood that love alone cannot mend a relationship without communication, acknowledgement, and balance. I began to see that the choices we make daily, the ones that seem small and insignificant, are what define the trajectory of a marriage. Ignoring feelings, prioritizing others' voices, staying silent instead of speaking truth, all of these had led us to this fragile moment. And yet, even in that fragility there was hope, because acknowledgement is the first step. And the first step, no matter how small, is the beginning of change. The days after that conversation were quieter, but charged with a new energy. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was subtle, like the first light of dawn creeping through a window after a long night. He began noticing small things I had been doing for years, making his favorite tea, leaving notes in his bag, adjusting the living room the way he liked it. Not that he had never noticed before. He had, but now he saw them differently. He acknowledged them with a soft smile, a gentle word, a look that lingered for a moment longer than it had in months. It was strange to feel seen again after months of quiet invisibility. I didn't rush into joy. I didn't believe it immediately. I had learned that hope must be earned moment by moment, choice by choice. But even small gestures mattered. A hand held while we walked through the garden. A quiet question about my day asked sincerely. A note left on my pillow, simple and unassuming. I see you. I hear you. I'm sorry. It was in these small gestures that the turning point truly revealed itself. Not with a loud declaration. Not with apologies shouted across the house. But in the quiet, patient restoration of care. We began talking more openly about the past months. About the misunderstandings, the miscommunications, the hurt that had grown silently like a shadow over our home. I spoke of the loneliness I had endured. He listened without interruption, without defensiveness, absorbing my words as if they were fragile glass he needed to handle carefully. And then came the hardest part. The part one had dreaded more than anything, the confrontation with his mother. I knew it had to happen eventually, because she was the reason the chasm had grown. Because he had allowed her voice to outweigh mine for far too long. Because for any healing to happen, boundaries had to be drawn. The first conversation was tense. Polite but tense. I spoke softly, calmly, but with clarity. I've tried to respect you, your expectations, your place in his life, I said. But sometimes it feels like I am invisible in my own home. I am his partner, and my feelings must matter as well. She listened, her expression unreadable. I held my breath, waiting for her to dismiss me, to criticize me, to show the same sharpness that had haunted my days. But she didn't. Instead, she said slowly, carefully, I didn't realize he had been hurt. I didn't see it. Maybe I was too focused on guiding him, on what I thought was right. It was a small opening, but it mattered. Acknowledgement, even partial, is the first step toward understanding. My husband, standing beside me, looked at both of us. And for the first time I saw a subtle shift in him. He wasn't just listening to his mother. He was listening to me. Truly, fully listening. The weeks that followed were not perfect. Boundaries were tested. Old habits crept back at times. But the tone of our home changed. It was calmer, gentler, more deliberate. I realized something profound in those days. The turning point of a relationship isn't a single event. It's a series of small choices, tiny acknowledgments, quiet acts of courage. The courage to speak your truth. The courage to listen. The courage to forgive. I began to feel a weight lifting from my chest. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough to breathe, to hope, to imagine life beyond the silent ache of the past months. And slowly, as days turned into weeks, the love that had been strained by silence and misaligned priorities began to surface again. Gentle, cautious, but undeniably real. A love tested by quiet trials, reshaped by honest confrontation, strengthened by the courage to face truths we had both avoided. The final moment of the turning point didn't arrive with drama. It didn't come with raised voices or slamming doors. It arrived in quiet, almost ordinary moments that carried extraordinary significance. One evening I was sitting by the window, watching the sky shift from soft gold to deep purple. He came and sat beside me silently. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The room was filled with the gentle hum of evening life, the distant bark of a dog, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, he reached for my hand. His fingers intertwined with mine, familiar, warm, grounding. "I know I hurt you," he said softly, his voice steady but layered with emotion. "I didn't see it before. I didn't understand. I want to make it right." I felt tears welling in my eyes. Not tears of anger. Not tears of frustration. But tears of relief, of recognition, of the quiet healing that begins when truth is finally acknowledged. We sat together in silence for a long while, letting the unspoken words fill the space between us. For the first time in months, I felt the tension in our home ease. The invisible walls that had grown between us, brick by brick, seemed to soften. Later that week, he suggested we spend an evening alone, just the two of us. No interruptions, no other voices guiding the rhythm of our lives. We cooked together, laughed over small mistakes, and reminisced about memories long buried under silence and subtle neglect. It was not perfection. It was not a complete resolution. But it was a beginning. A fragile, beautiful beginning. The turning point was not just his acknowledgement of my pain. It was my realization that I could no longer be silent, that love requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. That patience alone cannot sustain a partnership. That standing up for yourself is not rebellion, it is survival. One afternoon, his mother visited. I noticed a change in the dynamic immediately. He spoke with calm confidence, balancing respect for her with care for me. I could see the subtle shift in her expression too. A quiet understanding, an acknowledgement that I was no longer invisible in her son's life. It was in these small, seemingly mundane moments that the turning point truly settled. Not in dramatic confrontations, not in grand declarations, but in the quiet courage to speak, the willingness to listen, and the choice to act differently. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in our home began to change. The subtle tension softened. The silent walls between us became bridges. And I began to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't known for a long time. I realized that turning points are rarely single, monumental events. They are the sum of many small acts. The choice to acknowledge pain, the effort to listen, the decision to act with care, the courage to stand firm in your truth. And once those acts accumulate, once the tide of understanding begins to rise, the path forward becomes clear. I sat in the living room one evening, reflecting on all that had transpired, the months of quiet hurt, the subtle betrayals, the slow erosion of intimacy, the courage it took to speak and be heard. And I understood something vital. The turning point had not just changed him. It had changed me too. I had learned that strength is not in silence. Strength is in truth. in speaking, in listening, in standing, in forgiving, in hoping, even when the heart aches, even when the path is uncertain. And as I looked at him across the room, preparing dinner with a gentle smile, I felt a quiet warmth settle in my chest. The turning point had passed. The storm had been faced. And though there were still challenges ahead, the foundation of understanding had been laid. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was not perfect, but it was real. And in reality, with all its imperfections, there is hope, love, and the possibility of healing. That night, as we sat together in the soft glow of the lamps, I whispered softly, "I see you. I hear you. I know we can rebuild." And he nodded, holding my hand a little tighter, a silent promise of patience, care, and effort. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe. Not in the absence of conflict, not in the guarantee of perfection, but in the presence of truth, acknowledgement, and the quiet courage to choose each other again. The days after the turning point felt lighter, though not entirely free of shadows. The air in our home had changed, not dramatically, not perfectly, but subtly, like the soft first light of dawn after a long night. I noticed him in ways I hadn't for months. The small gestures, the gentle way he poured my tea, the hand he offered when we walked through the garden, the way he listened when I spoke, made the distance we had felt for so long seem a little less heavy. I realized that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes slowly, quietly, in the moments we choose to be present and patient. We began to talk more openly about our feelings, not just about the past months, but about our dreams, our fears, and the simple joys we had been ignoring. We laughed together in ways that felt familiar and yet new. The laughter was gentle, unforced, carrying a sense of relief and rediscovery. I began to see him as a partner again, not just a husband, but someone who could be present, attentive, and supportive. And I realized that I had changed too. I was no longer the quiet, silent observer of my own hurt. I had spoken. I had asserted myself. I had demanded to be seen, heard, and respected. And in doing so, I had reclaimed a part of myself I had almost forgotten. One evening, he suggested we take a walk. The garden was quiet, the sun low in the sky, casting soft golden light over the flowers and trees. We walked side by side, hands brushing, words flowing gently between us. He spoke about his mother, about his realization of how he had prioritized her voice over ours, about his desire to do better. I listened and I spoke, and slowly, the distance that had felt so insurmountable began to dissolve. I realized that resolution isn't about forgetting the hurt or pretending it never existed. It's about acknowledgement, understanding, and the conscious choice to move forward together. It's about rebuilding trust piece by piece, word by word, act by act. We began setting small boundaries with his mother, not out of anger or resentment, but out of necessity. We communicated calmly, explaining our needs, our feelings, and the importance of preserving the balance between family and partnership. First, it was uncomfortable. Old habits die slowly. But over time, she began to understand, and our home felt less like a stage and more like a shared sanctuary. I also began noticing the subtle ways he had changed. He stopped automatically echoing her words without thought. He considered my perspective. He asked for my input before making decisions. And even in moments of disagreement, he approached them with care, respect, and the intent to understand. It was in these small daily choices that resolution took root. Not in grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but in the quiet, steady commitment to change. And as the weeks turned into months, I felt a sense of peace return, a sense that our marriage, though tested, had found a new equilibrium. I also learned something profound about myself. I realized that I am stronger than I had ever believed, that speaking my truth does not make me weak, that standing up for my feelings is not selfish, but necessary for love to survive. And that forgiveness, when genuine and deliberate, can restore not just a relationship, but also a sense of self. One afternoon, as we sat together in the garden, I looked at him and smiled softly. He smiled back, and in that simple exchange I felt the culmination of everything: the pain, the silence, the struggle, the acknowledgement, and the quiet rebuilding of trust. I knew that life would continue to present challenges, that there would be moments of misunderstanding, moments of frustration, and moments of doubt. But I also knew that we had learned to navigate them together, with patience, respect, and a commitment to see each other clearly. Resolution, I realized, is not a destination. It is a journey of listening, understanding, forgiving, and choosing each other every day. And though the path may be imperfect, it is also filled with moments of quiet grace, love, and hope. That night, as we sat by the window watching the stars appear, I whispered softly, "We've come a long way." He nodded, holding my hand gently. "Yes," he said, "and we'll keep moving forward together." For the first time in a long time, I felt a profound sense of calm. A calm that came not from the absence of conflict, but from the presence of understanding, honesty, and mutual care. A calm that whispered, "We are still here, still standing, still choosing each other." In the following weeks, our home felt different, gentle, soft, and intentional. Even the smallest details reflected the change. He began noticing the way I arranged the flowers on the table, the care I took in preparing meals, the small notes I left to brighten his day. And he acknowledged them not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That simple shift made all the difference. We started sharing more of ourselves. The fears, the worries, the little joys that we had kept tucked away during the months of tension. I spoke openly about my feelings, and he listened with patience and empathy. It was a new rhythm, one built on communication, trust, and understanding. I also noticed changes in him beyond our relationship. He seemed calmer, more deliberate in his choices. He stopped allowing other voices to overpower our shared decisions. And even when there were differences of opinion, he approached them with care rather than dismissal. One evening, as we sat together quietly, he turned to me and said, "I realize now how much I took for granted." I smiled softly, feeling warmth in my chest. "It's okay," I said gently. "We're learning, both of us. That's what matters." We began creating new rituals. Simple, meaningful acts to strengthen our bond. Evening walks in the garden, cooking together, sharing our thoughts before bedtime. Nothing grand, nothing forced. Just small moments of connection that slowly healed the cracks in our relationship. I reflected on the months of pain, silence, and subtle betrayals. I realized that every moment, even the painful ones, had taught me something valuable. They taught me patience, not the passive kind, but the kind that allows space for growth. They taught me courage, the courage to speak my truth, even when it was uncomfortable. They taught me the importance of boundaries, respect, and mutual acknowledgement. Our home became a sanctuary once again. Not perfect, but ours. The tension that had once defined the atmosphere softened into calm. The walls that had silently separated us transformed into bridges of understanding. I also learned the value of forgiveness. Not forgetting, not excusing, but releasing the weight of hurt to create space for love to grow. Forgiveness, I realized, is as much for oneself as it is for others. It allows the heart to heal, to breathe, and to choose connection over resentment. One afternoon, he surprised me with a small note left on my pillow. "Thank you for your patience, your love, and for never giving up on us." I felt tears well up, not of sadness but of relief and gratitude, because in those few words lay acknowledgement, understanding, and a commitment to move forward together. The journey was not over. Challenges would come. Old habits could return. Misunderstandings might arise. But we had learned the tools to navigate them: communication, empathy, patience, and love grounded in mutual respect. Evenings became moments of reflection. We would sit quietly, hand in hand, sharing thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. Our conversations were no longer weighed down by unspoken resentments. They flowed freely, gently, creating a rhythm of connection that had been missing for too long. I realized that resolution is not an event, it is a process. It requires ongoing effort, intentional choices, and a willingness to grow together. And it is in this continuous effort that love finds its deepest roots. One night, as we watched the stars emerge in the sky, he turned to me and whispered, "I'm glad we didn't give up on us." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in months. "Neither did I whispered back. In that quiet, ordinary moment, I understood the true power of resilience, patience, and mutual care. Our relationship was not perfect. It was real. It was honest. It was alive. And for the first time in a long while, I felt whole again, not because life had been easy, but because love had been chosen, nurtured, and restored. The calm that settled over our home was not sudden. It was the result of countless small moments, gentle gestures, honest conversations, Acts of consideration that slowly wove a new pattern into our daily life. I began noticing the little ways we reconnected, the ways trust returned quietly without fanfare. He would pause now, really listen when I spoke. He asked for my opinion before making decisions, even the small ones that once felt trivial. And when we disagreed, there was no tension, only dialogue. A dialogue rooted in respect, empathy, and the shared understanding that we were a team. I also found that I was lighter. The weight I had carried for months, the silent hurt, the quiet despair, the sense of being unseen was beginning to lift. I smiled more freely, laughed more genuinely, and allowed myself to hope again. Not the naive hope of before, but the grounded hope of someone who has endured, survived, and chosen to believe in love's resilience. His mother visited less frequently now, and when she did, the atmosphere was different. She acknowledged the changes even subtly, and our home no longer felt like a stage where I had to perform for approval. It felt like a true home, shared between people who understood the value of balance, care, and respect. One morning he came to me with a gentle smile. "I realize that life is too short to let misunderstandings linger," he said softly. "I want us to make every day count, even the small ones." I felt a swell of gratitude, not just for his words but for the commitment they represented, a commitment to act, not just speak, to nurture what we had and to choose each other daily. We began creating new traditions. Sunday breakfasts together, handwritten notes, evening walks, small celebrations of ordinary achievements. Every act, no matter how simple, carried meaning. Every smile, every touch, every conversation strengthened the bonds that had been stretched thin for months. I reflected often on the journey that had brought us here. The months of quiet pain, the moments of silent observation, the small betrayals, the turning point, and now the gentle rebuilding. I understood that relationships are not immune to strain. They require patience, courage, empathy, and the willingness to confront difficult truths. One afternoon, as I was arranging flowers in the living room, he came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "I'm grateful for your strength," he whispered, "for your love, your patience, and for giving us another chance." Tears formed in my eyes, not of sadness but of relief, joy, and quiet pride. Because in that moment, I realized the depth of what we had endured and the beauty of what we had rebuilt. Love, I understood, is not just an emotion. It is choice. Daily, persistent, courageous. The final weeks of this chapter were filled with quiet joy. Not perfection but peace. Not dramatic reconciliations but steady, intentional care. We had learned the delicate art of balancing respect, boundaries, and partnership. We had rediscovered the beauty of listening, understanding, and nurturing love with intention. And in the stillness of these days, I found clarity. I saw that my journey had taught me resilience. It had taught me the importance of standing up for myself. It had taught me that love cannot thrive without acknowledgement, honesty, and mutual effort. And above all, it had shown me that even in the deepest quiet of hurt, hope can take root and grow again. One evening, as we sat together under the soft glow of the lamps, I whispered, "We've come so far." He took my hand, holding it with care, and said, "Yes, and we'll keep moving forward together." And in that quiet affirmation, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because life would never bring challenges again, but because we had chosen each other. We had faced the storm, navigated the pain, and committed to rebuilding with intention, patience, and love. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt whole again. Whole not because the world had changed, but because we had chosen to change together. And that, I realized, is the essence of resolution. Not forgetting the past but learning from it. Not erasing the hurt, but allowing love and understanding to heal it. Not perfect but real. Not easy but deeply, profoundly worth it. The days that followed felt like a gentle sunrise after a long, stormy night. Our home was quieter, calmer, not because everything was perfect, but because we had learned to breathe together again. I noticed small changes, the way he would glance at me with soft understanding, the way our conversations flowed without hesitation, the way laughter returned to corners of the house that had grown too silent. I often reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The months of subtle betrayal, quiet hurt, and overlooked feelings had left marks, yes, but they also taught me invaluable lessons. I learned that love is not a guarantee, it is a choice. that being silent in the face of pain is not courage, but surrender, and that acknowledging each other's feelings is the first step to true connection. I also realized the strength that lies in patience and resilience. The strength to speak up, to stand firm, to confront uncomfortable truths, and still remain compassionate. The courage to face not just others but oneself, and accept responsibility for mistakes, misunderstandings, and oversights. And most importantly, the ability to forgive, not to forget, but to release the weight of the past and allow room for growth. Life returned to its rhythm, but it was richer, deeper, more intentional. Evenings were spent together, sharing quiet conversations or simply sitting in companionable silence. We found joy in small routines, preparing tea together, tending to the garden, writing little notes to each other. Each act, no matter how ordinary, became a thread weaving our lives closer together. His mother, too, learned to respect the boundaries we had set gently but firmly. Her visits became moments of warmth rather than tension. And in seeing the balance between love for a mother and commitment to a spouse, I realized that boundaries do not weaken relationships, they strengthen them. I often think back to the turning point, the day when quiet acknowledgement began to replace months of unspoken hurt. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was a simple choice, to listen, to understand, to change, and to heal. And in that choice, everything shifted. I learned to appreciate not just the love that remained, but the effort it took to preserve it. Because love is not just a feeling. It is work, persistence, patience, and attention. It is choosing someone every day, even when it is difficult. It is building a life together with care, understanding, and respect. As I sit by the window now, the soft glow of the evening sun warming the room, I feel a deep sense of peace. I feel grateful for the struggles, for the lessons, for the love that endured. And I feel hopeful for the future, for the quiet moments we will continue to share, for the laughter, the understanding, and the companionship that now feels unshakable. I whisper softly to myself, almost like a prayer. We made it through. We chose each other. And that is enough. The moral of our story is simple yet profound. True love is not about perfection. It is about courage, patience, honesty, and the willingness to face difficult truths together. It is about acknowledging mistakes, respecting boundaries, and choosing each other, again and again, despite the challenges. And when two hearts commit to these truths, even the deepest pain can give way to quiet joy, understanding, and a lasting bond. And so, in the calm of the evening with the soft hum of life around us, I feel complete. Not because life is free of trials, but because love, honesty, and courage have restored what was nearly lost. The storm has passed. The house is warm. And our hearts, though tested, are at home with each other again. Thank you for listening to today's story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Aunt Betty's Stories. Hit the bell so you never miss a new story filled with love, family, and hope. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt tales that make you feel, reflect, and smile. See you in the next video. Goodbye.